Story 5, Orange 3. Orange 3 underscore part 1. The red fabric seats held nothing but dust that made him uneasy. He didn't know what to expect, but he did expect someone. The letter told him the exam would be held the following day at the old theater, and that he should take a seat in the main auditorium. It also told him he would be safe, but little else. A voice through speakers was the only entity welcoming him. "Please sit," it said. "Where?" he asked, but there was no reply, so he just strolled down the aisle and stopped more or less in the middle. He had never been at the old theater before, not even when it was a new theater with different plays opening every month and long lines of people curving the corners for tickets. "Can we raise the curtain?" the voice asked. He wanted to say yes, but only a shriek came from his throat. He felt nervous. The voice insisted, "You can." "Yes," he finally coughed out. A faint orange glow framed the stage curtain from behind, an old piece of cloth ripped at places and stained all over. It rose slowly, and as it did the man grew increasingly agitated and confused. "What do you see?" the voice asked. "What is this?" "You must tell us what you see." "I see for children. They are sitting in wooden chairs, looking at me. What are their names?" He began, but then he paused for a moment. "I don't know these children. Describe them." The man moved inside his seat with discomfort. The tie was too tight, the bloody red tie he didn't want to bring anyway. He gave it a pull to loosen it up a bit. "They wear old clothes," he said. "Well, not old, but antique. They are very still. Describe each one." "Why are they so still?" "Describe each one, please." "I don't understand," he began. "There are 2 boys and 2 girls, but the 2 boys are the same, and the 2 girls are the same also. They don't look the same. They are the same. Not like twins, more like copies. Go on." "The boys are brown-eyed and brown-haired. They wear leather boots under cotton trousers and white shirts with red suspenders. Go on." "The girls wear a floral-themed cotton dress, white sandals, and green ribbons on their heads. The hair is lighter than the boys, but they have much darker eyes." "Can you tell us their names now?" "This is odd, but yes, I know their names now. Martin and Anna." "How do I know their names?" "You told us there were for children, but only gave us 2 names. I told you they were copies of each other. 2 boys called Martin, 2 girls called Anna. Their eyes are open, but—" And he stopped. Yes, one hand started to swing his tie from side to side, while the other was clamping so hard on itself the nails started to pierce the skin. "Yes," the voice insisted. "They are not alive," he finally said. "They are not dead either. They have never been alive." He shivered and felt an urgent need to close his eyes. Once he did, he surprisingly thought of her, always angry at him, always telling him he's always breaking things. Truth be told, he did break her, and when he did it was serious. The voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "You cannot keep your eyes closed. Please tell us what you see." The man gave a better look. "They are not children," he said. "They look like children. They look exactly like children, but they're not. They are mechanical. I know it. I know they are mechanical." "What do you mean?" "They are made of cogs inside. I can see them." "Are the children transparent?" "No, but I can see the cogs somehow." "You mean you can sense them?" "No, not sense them. I can see the cogs. It's hard to explain, and they are moving. I mean, These children things are still, they are very still, but the cogs inside are moving. But the children are completely still. Completely. It upsets me. Do you wish them to move? No, why, I think I'm afraid. Of what are you afraid? I'm afraid of what will happen when they start moving. You fear they may attack you. I've been told I would be safe. What are you afraid of? Then, I don't know. I'm just afraid. I shouldn't be, but I am, that is all. He was trying to keep a calm voice, but it was hard. Martin, he said. What about him? The voice asked. He is raising one arm. Now the second Martin is doing the same. Are you afraid now? His hands were spiking his legs, his skin starting to soak, his eyes as open as moon craters. I'm safe. I've been told I would be safe. I shouldn't be afraid. I'm not afraid. But he closed his eyes nonetheless, and she was once again on his mind. You're safe, he told her. You're drunk, she said. You're an idiot and you're drunk. Always such a bloody Prudence goddess, he thought. They were just a couple of beers. I can drive. I can keep you safe. Only he didn't. They crashed. Her right arm broke in 3 different places, and she had a concussion. He was by her side the whole time she was at the hospital, but they didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. 6 full days mutually ignoring one another. One day he accidentally touched her hand while going for the remote, but the hand quickly slid away from him, and her whole body closed upon itself with a shiver. You have to open your eyes, the voice said. You have to keep telling us what you see. He obeyed. The children, he said. What about them? They don't look like children anymore. No, I was mistaken. They never looked like children. They are, yes. They are a spider, a mechanical and enormous spider. The cogs inside, they were never cogs. They were small spiders, black ones, moving inside the big spider. His panting made his voice come out as thin as a strand of web. His eyes were jumping out of his skull, while his body was trying to bury itself inside the seat. The spider is all over me. It is so big, so bloody big. It is trying to touch me. And the sound it makes. Don't you see the children anymore? You don't understand. The children are the spider. You mean the 4 children compose the different parts of the spider? And the sound it makes, oh, the sound it makes. He was holding both hands at his ears, fighting not to close his eyes again. The sound comes from the mouths of the children. They scream like they are dying. This is their dying scream. Make it stop. Please make it stop. How can they be dying if you told us they were not alive? I don't know. I swear I don't. I don't want to look any more. Please don't make me look any more. You have to. He was trying to obey, fighting to keep his eyelids from shutting down. But they were so heavy, so bloody heavy, that the theater vanished once more behind them. And now she was eating soup at his side. She held the spoon with her left hand, since her right arm was wrapped in cast. The letter was beside the bowl. It came today. I need to take the exam tomorrow, he said. She ignored him. He knew what it meant. It meant she couldn't care less. But it also meant she thought he would fail. He tried to remember the last time they exchanged something other than hatred, but that only made him angry. He also tried to remember the last time he didn't fail at something, but that only made him angrier. It is mandatory to take the exam once you're cold, he said. I don't know of anyone who has taken the exam. My sister's cousin had a friend. I think she took it. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll pass. The exam is tomorrow, she said. That's what I said. This soup is terrible, was the only thing she answered. You must keep telling us what you see, the voice urged. The sound of the children had faded to a low hum. He opened his eyes. On stage he no longer saw the children and the spider. He saw something else. What is the meaning of this? I see. Yes, I see my wife. Why is my wife here? Describe her to us. What are you doing here? He shouted. The voice on the speakers grew impatient. Please, describe her to us. I don't understand. Why is she part of the exam? There was no reply. The man sprang to his feet and walked down the auditorium. She's wearing her green dress. I hate that dress and her hair. Her hair is a mess, he said, while jumping onto the stage. Why are you here? He asked, but then he paused, gazed, shivered. It is not her, he finally realized. Who is it, then? It is not even a woman. It is a mechanical thing that looks like her, made of small mechanical spiders, and each spider is made of those for children, only now they are as small as ants legs. No, smaller than that. Continue. The spiders form a mass, and the mass looks like her. It's a trick. I can see it now. You think this is a trick? He started to laugh. He laughed so hard he had to hold his bladder in. I can prove it, he said, still laughing, and then he reached for her. Describe us what you are doing. See, I've ripped her left eye out, but it is not an eye. It is a spider, see. I'm throwing the spider at the floor, and I'm crushing it. Continue. I'm taking out all the spiders, one by one. I'm dismantling her, not breaking her, dismantling her. Do you see? Continue. The spiders crack under my boot. I'm dismantling her and breaking the spiders. I'm not afraid. Not anymore. Continue. And the children, the mechanical children, and the low hum they're making. Continue. The hum stops as soon as I fall on them with my shoe. The voice did not reply. It wasn't my wife. It was never my wife. All around me nothing but crushed mechanical spiders, crushed mechanical children. The voice did not reply. You saw what I did. The voice did not reply. Did you see it? The voice did not reply. Did you see it? He was not laughing any more. You did, didn't you? A loud crack reverberated in the room, and all the lights died. Part 2. He never thought of himself as a sunset person. Some people find them spectacular events. He didn't. He felt that orange light always rendered everything a bit wrong, but at that particular moment, he finally realized it was the sunset in itself that felt wrong. When the lights went out inside the theater, he knew the exam was over. The letter told him where and when he had to be to begin, but it said nothing of what he should do after finishing it. He waited a while for instructions, but after a few minutes he came to the conclusion there wouldn't be any. He was in the dark, but not afraid. Not anymore. He waved his hands around, searching the floor as a blind man, but he found nothing. No children, no spiders, no wife. So he just started to feel his way out of the auditorium. He touched a door, then another, then another. A final door opened outside, and he saw the sunset behind the rooftops. It didn't feel wrong. Not then. He took a deep breath and tried to recall what happened. What did I do? First it was pure doubt, then it was pure terror. They made me do something, didn't they? He knew it had been a trick, but it turned out to be a different kind of trick from what he thought. Did I kill her? It was the moment to be afraid, he thought. So he put his feet into a panicking motion and headed home. When he arrived at his doorstep, all out of breath, he felt that something had been wrong the entire journey. First he thought of the people, or their absence, to be precise. He didn't see one single person the whole way. Such was odd, but that was not it. Then he looked at the trees and the vivid green of the leaves. It was not November green, and it was November. Such was odd, too, but that was not it. He then checked his clock. Still little past 3 in that orange afternoon. That was it. What he felt as wrong the whole way was the sunset. There are no sunsets at 3 in the afternoon, not where he lives anyway. That was wrong. That was definitely wrong. Even so, he took his keys, opened the front door, and went inside, not sure of what he expected, not sure of what he wanted. She was at the study, holding the books in her hands and looking up at a high shelf. He was so quiet going in it spooked her. "Oh, it's you," she said. "You pushed me this close to a heart attack. Silly thing." She surprised him with a kiss and went back to shelving the books. "How was the exam?" "It was good, I think," he said, while his fingers touched his lips. "Did you pass?" He had not thought of that until that moment. Truth be told, he didn't know. He didn't know what kind of exam that was. If it was the kind where you pass or fail, or where you find out something about yourself. He knew nothing. Nothing at all, and so he lied. Yes, I did. That is very good," she praised. "We should celebrate. You know what we could do. You could cook that lasagna of yours, and I'll open the bottle of Douro. It sounds good. Yes, it sounds wonderful." He was then surprised by her arm, and how it was all clean and free of cast. "How is your arm?" "It's fine. Silly thing, just fine." Then she laughed. He had forgotten all about that laugh. He had forgotten all about the high pitch that started it, the throat tremble which followed, and the deep chest finale. He had forgotten all about that laugh. Don't just stand there. Go cook. Such loveliness was intoxicating. He was 21 all over again. When she walked away, he didn't walk after. He floated. That's how it felt anyway. He floated into the kitchen. He floated while he cooked. Then he floated out of the kitchen, carrying forks and knives and plates and glasses, and he was floating when he saw it, framed inside his own house on top of his own sideboard, the photographs, one of a boy, one of a girl, Martin. Anna, when her wife heard the sound of breaking porcelain in the dining room, she rushed to see what happened. "You are always breaking things," she said, but she was not angry, not at all. She was smiling. She was smiling a midday sun-bright smile. "Would you kiss me?" he asked. Suddenly, her smile toned down. It was no longer a midday sun-bright smile. It was a sunset smile, but it didn't feel wrong. She held his head gently, and gently she kissed him. First she just touched his lips with her own. Then she opened them and slid her tongue inside. Then she devoured his breath, his body, his soul. He had forgotten all about that kiss. When she stopped, he looked deep into her eyes, and that's when he saw the spiders moving inside her pupils. "The lasagna is ready," he said, "but we'll need other dishes." She laughed again. "Well, I can see that. Go get them. I'll open the bottle." The whole meal he stared at her, drawing a fake smile every time she raised her eyes at him, her eyes infested with spiders. The smile she gave him, however, didn't feel fake. They felt as pure as she had ever given him. They ate without a word. They washed the dishes without a word. They took a shower together without a word. They fucked without a word. They fell asleep without a word. He woke up 2 hours later and looked outside. It was still sunset. She was deeply asleep, wearing that beautiful sleep expression of hers. He had forgotten all about that expression. It is not her, he told himself. He felt thirsty and headed for the kitchen, but first he stopped at the dining room and looked at the framed photographs. Martin and Anna were gone. They had been replaced by photographs of him and his wife. They must suspect I know, he realized. And they're trying to confuse me to put me off track. The kitchen still smelled of bechamel and red wine. I'm so bloody thirsty. He filled a glass of water and drank it. He filled a second glass of water and drank it. He took a deep, satisfied breath and went back to his room. Calmly holding a kitchen knife in his right hand, the room had an orange hue. Sunsets always render everything a bit wrong, he thought. Outside the window, he saw no one. He sat at his bed, next to her. With his left hand, he caressed her cheeks and felt her hair. With his right hand, he held the kitchen knife on top of his thigh. She opened her eyes briefly and smiled. Everything fine. Silly thing. Everything perfect. Everything just perfect. And she went back to sleep. Part 3. This is a cast saw, the doctor said. It is specially made to cut through the cast without harming the skin. To tell me if you feel any pain at all. She nodded and the saw started to vibrate. She looked away. The wall had a reproduction of a painting by J.N.W. Turner. Nothing but orange paint, she thought. She closed her eyes and thought of the sky and of how it was nothing but orange to when he told her she was safe. She told him he was drunk. He wasn't. Not really, but he had been an idiot that whole afternoon, and she wanted to insult him, to be angry with him, to hurt him. They were always at each other's throats for the last 2 years. They were at each other's throats when the curve came and the setting sunlight and the wind shield up like it was Nagasaki. All done, the doctor said. She opened her eyes. How are you doing? He asked. She didn't answer. She was staring at the Turner reproduction. 1830 to 35. Tate Britain. Feeling any headaches? Nausea? She shook her head. How about difficulties sleeping? Difficulties sleeping? Yes, of course I have difficulties sleeping. I understand. Do you want to take something? She stood up and reached for the Turner print. There was no texture. Sunsets have textures and sounds and tastes, she thought. They did now, at least something. Like what? Something to help you sleep better. I don't want to sleep better, she said, and she closed her eyes again. Blue lights were flashing all around. We'll take you out of there, lady, someone told her. She remembered the flashlight at her eyes, the cervical collar, the loud sound of the siren as they drove her to the hospital, the questions. Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Do you know what day is it today, Anna? My name is Anna. Anna, the doctor called. You don't need to go through this like that. Like what? It was not your fault. I didn't say it was, is it all? Can I go? On her way out, she saw the room where she thought he moved his hand to touch hers. He was going to be fine. We wasn't going to die or anything like that. No yet. We're optimistic, they said. We need to do this head exam to know exactly what to do next, they said. Anna tried to remember him before the accident. She could remember things she did with him, but she couldn't remember him. She tried to recall the first time they had sex. He cooked lasagna. It was an awful lasagna. The bechamel was too thick, and the meat as salty as the Dead Sea. But she lied and ate it with a smile. She remembered the wine and the taste of the wine, but not the taste of his mouth. She remembered what they did in bed like items on a list, but not what it felt like, and she knew by heart all they talked about afterwards. But she couldn't remember his voice. The voice was what hurt the most. Anna left the hospital and took a bus home. When she arrived at her doorstep, the sun was setting over the rooftops. The keys were in hand, but she showed no intention of opening the door. She just stood there. She stood there for a few minutes, then a few minutes longer. The sharp January air sliced through her clothes, but she didn't seem to notice. She was listening to the doctors. She was listening their words from November. "We're optimistic," they said. "He will probably make it," they said. But then something happened during the exam. It was little past 3 in the afternoon. He had a seizure. We don't know why. His vitals went down so fast. The front door opened. "How long have you been here?" "You're ice cold. Get in." Anna went inside. "You're freezing, dear. I'll fix you up with something hot." Anna's mother-in-law moved slow and heavily. She brought her a cup of tea, a blanket, and ordered her to rest in the sofa. "What were you doing out there?" Anna didn't answer. "What did the doctor say about your arm?" Anna didn't answer. "Well, suit yourself," she said as she left the living room. Anna got up and went after her. "I'll cook tonight," she said. "I'll make lasagna." "Are you sure? Can you use your arm?" Anna nodded. "Well, I guess that is quite all right, then." Before starting to cook, Anna went to her room. It was already dark outside, but she didn't turn the lights on. She didn't want to look at him. "He's in a stable vegetative state," they explained. "He won't be able to move or interact. Sometimes he may have his eyes open, but he doesn't see or hear. His brain is disconnected from his senses. Do you understand this?" Anna said nothing. "You also need to understand he doesn't need a machine to live. So he must go home." "Is he still in there?" she asked. "Some part of him, maybe, but nobody can say." "How are you feeling?" Anna said nothing. "Do you understand what this means, Anna?" "I'll take him home. I'll feed him through a tube. I'll change his diapers and keep him clean," she said. And she took him home, and she fed him, and she kept him clean. Anna and her mother-in-law ate the lasagna in silence. They were quietly drinking cheap red wine when her mother-in-law said, "You need to be strong, Anna. We need to be strong for Martin." "That is not Martin," Anna replied. She thought that when that sentence were to finally come out, it would be shouted out, each word a heavy stone, each word relentlessly violent, each word the whole message. That is not Martin. That's why a smile almost grew on her face when she heard how softly she was saying it, like a sweet secret whispered between lovers in one single breath. That is not Martin. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, threw her reply as furiously as she could. "That is Martin. That is my son, your husband." Anna said nothing. The rest of the evening they didn't speak. The table was cleared in silence, the kitchen cleaned in silence. In silence the mother went to check on her son, then retired to the guest room and turned the TV on. Anna knew it would stay on until morning. It helped her mother-in-law sleep. Anna smoked in the kitchen while looking outside. "The night is dark and heavy and filled with silence," she thought. "I am the night," she thought. After taking a shower, she went to her room. Martin had his eyes open. That scared her. that always scared her. She closed them gently and noticed his lips were dry, so she gave him water with a small sponge before trying to get some sleep. 1 hour later she was still awake, and her own mouth was dry. The kitchen still smelled of Bechamel and red wine. Anna drank a glass of water. Then she lit up a cigarette. Then she drank another glass of water. And then she lit up another cigarette. This last one she didn't smoke. She just let it burn away in the ashtray. She repeated this until the pack got empty and the sun started to rise. A sunrise is just a sunset in the opposite direction, she thought. That's when she decided to go back to her room, calmly holding a kitchen knife in her right hand. Story 6. The chirp. Another chirp drifted into the room from outside. The window was open again. It hadn't been 10 minutes since Jacob had slammed it closed. He stared at it, into the front yard beyond where the grass had become an ugly orange-brown, and thought of how exposed he was. Anything could get in once the latch had been swiveled open. The thought made his bones tighten. Sniffling and hacking, he got up from his chair to close it again. He was getting sick. It was the tail end of fall, and all the leaves that had been in the trees were on the ground, golden and deceased. In the mornings, frost had started to form on the roofs and hoods of cars, and the grass had become brittle. It crunched underfoot at every step, the only sound Jacob focused on as he tramped across his backyard, checking for signs of the intruder. But he hadn't been outside to check in 3 days. For him, it was no longer safe to do so. 2 weeks earlier, he had been a normal high school kid. He did everything one would expect of a lively senior: weekend boozing, class skipping, and the occasional after-school slice at Yucca Steve's Pizza Palace. Everything seemed to be just as it should have been on a perfectly sunny Wednesday morning. That day, Jacob had slept through his alarm and lay in bed as his parents engaged in their usual coffee ritual in the kitchen. They poured it, steaming and black, into their enamel mugs and grimaced as they took it in. Shrugging on their coats, they roared off in their respective vehicles, leaving the boy alone in the house. They worked in the city and wouldn't be home until late, so when he finally woke up and found that it was past noon, he decided to shirk school and take his time getting ready to cruise out to the strip mall. He slipped out of bed and walked over the cold wood floor to his bathroom, where he brushed his teeth for nearly 10 minutes. As he did so, he stared at his eyes. They looked vapid, like a twin set of opaque swamps with swirling bog bubbles at their centers. He spat a bloody soup of toothpaste and plaque into the sink and dried his mouth with a towel. There were no clean shirts in his closet, so he plunged a hand into a mountain of worn clothes next to the footboard of his bed and retrieved a shirt and his favorite pair of jeans. Once dressed, he proceeded through the hallway and the living room into the kitchen and whipped the freezer door open. Raspberry tarts were his favorite, and he was in luck. There were 5, so he took them all out and stood in front of the toaster, heating them in cycles until they were in a steaming stack on his plate. He filled a glass of milk to complement them and brought his bounty teetering to the coffee table in the living room. With a latent finger, he pressed the power button on a remote sitting on the table. The television crackled to life, howling sports. He was disheartened to learn that his favorite football team had lost. It was a very important thing to him. Like most sports fans, he didn't realize that he was volunteering his heart to be torn into with each ignoble defeat his idols encountered. Jacob sneered, flipped to the music channel and wolfed down his tarts. If he had been more aware, he might have heard the tap that occurred at each window in the room, one after the other, every 2 seconds, and the chirp. 30 minutes later, his stomach was full. He slipped into his shoes, grabbed his board, and left through the front door, kicking it closed behind him. It was only 2:15, but it seemed unusually dark. The few shredded cotton ball clods didn't account for the deepness of it. He jogged out into his front yard and almost threw his board down to roll away, but some dark, crouching thing at the far end of the street caught his eye as he neared the curb. It was standing behind a sycamore in the Jamesons' yard. It looked like pure shadow, head indeterminable. A light wind was ruffling a row of hedges just behind it, which appeared to agitate the figure. When it wasn't looking over its shoulders or back down its side of the street, it seemed to be focused on Jacob. "Hey," he said. The shadow didn't react, but he thought he could hear a chattering rasp coming from somewhere deep in the thing's throat. He didn't like the sound one bit. "The fucker you looking at?" His question went unanswered. The dark creature started moving back and forth as if it were the native inhabitant of some far-flung island doing a dance to invoke its gods. Jacob could feel sweat slick on his temples and the hollow throb of his heart. He was getting the jim-jams in a serious way. Suddenly, he wanted to beat it, to kill it before it could do something horrible to him. He took a few quick steps off of the curb and started yelling, "Answer me, you little bastard, or I swear to God I'll..." But suddenly the shadow was gone. It was like it had melted into the grass, spilled like a towering column of India ink. Utterly perplexed, Jacob could think of nothing else to do to jump onto his skateboard and light off down the street, leaving the shadow behind. Odd and unexplained, he'd always thought better of following the whims of curiosity. He had seen too many scenes in horror movies end badly because of such indulgences. The wind blew his hair back into a rippling raven flag. He kick-flipped up onto a stairway railing on his way through the neighborhood park and grinded down into a manual at the bottom, screeching to a stop after landing and yanking his fist down to his chest in celebration. A nearby kid whose face had been invaded by a spore-like smattering hackney gave him a thumbs up. He returned it graciously, beaming, and sped off down another hill. The whole time he rode through the streets, he consistently peered over his shoulder, just in case there was some black gaping nightmare sprinting at his heels. He had the distinct sensation of being followed. The feeling was leaching the joy from his bones. 15 minutes later, he arrived at the strip mall. Leaves were drifting around lazily in the parking lot, skidding against the concrete, rasping out a symphony. The air had grown slightly colder, and there was no one to be seen mulling about the storefronts or cars. In fact, every store appeared deserted. Jake felt uneasy and approached his final destination, Sikianti Arcade. Dropping his skateboard by the door, he shielded his eyes to counteract the obscuring reflection of the parking lot and peered in through the glass. He couldn't see any of his friends tapping furiously at plastic keys or yanking on joysticks. There was no cashier at the counter. All that he saw was an inky dimness and a few spakes of complacent dust that hung immobile in the air. Something was wrong. The arcade was always bustling with activity. He tried the handle. At first it wouldn't budge, but on his fifth tug, Jake wrenched it open with unexpected ease. It swung past him and smacked into the adjacent wall. He stepped inside, peering cautiously down aisles of game cabinets, and growing all the more anxious as he worked his way toward the back. He figured he might at least find Midday Fred, the day janitor. He was always in the back, afternoons, chewing on his dirty beard as he toiled betwixt slimy, desperate teens. But, to Jake's surprise, there was not a single sweep of a broom or rustle of a garbage bag when he neared the rear corner. Even after pushing on the lever to the maintenance room door, he encountered nothing but a continuation of solitude. He was utterly alone, and each step he took became louder than its prior as the seconds of realization passed. It was unnatural for it to be that quiet at the strip mall, where everyone came to skip school and enjoy the days of their youth to the last drop. In a panic, he called out, "Hello, is anyone here at all?" But silence was his only answer. He felt the sudden urge to leave, to go straight back home, to his warm room, his safe, comfortable bed, thronged with comic books and stiff socks. He started back toward the front door at a quickened pace, but after passing the restrooms halfway to the exit, he heard a squeaking and stopped. Supposing that he had stepped in water, the noise continued, though it wasn't quite a squeak. It was fundamentally different, but recognizable to him. Images were conjured in his mind of childhood, chasing butterflies through a park, chirp blue jays. "Definitely not in here," he said to the darkness. "Where do I recognize that sound from?" Chirp. Dread was coiling up in the pit of his stomach like a lead boa constrictor. He knew, suddenly, that something had been stalking him from the moment he'd walked in. Whatever it was, it continued to emit the queer chirp just a row over from where he stood. "That's fucking it," he said, and sprinted for the door. He refused to look back, but he could hear the sound of hard, narrow feet beating against the threadbare carpet. Mere feet behind him, broomsticks on ceramic tile. His stalker's chirp had turned into a low whirring whistle that might have sounded like a cat purring after having eaten one of those small plastic Casio pianos he used to play with when he was younger. The thing, whatever it was closing the distance between them. He could feel something like whiskers or antennae lightly grazing his shirt. When he reached the door handle, he jammed it forward, burst out into the open parking lot, and continued to run for several yards. He could no longer hear the thing's horrifying tone at his back, so he slowed to a jog and then walked in circles for a few moments. He stopped and doubled over, panting. It had gotten even darker outside, and great viscous clouds, pregnant with rain and winking lightning, had come rolling in from the south. He didn't see any cars in the road. The parking lot was still bereft of any sign of life. He scanned the broad, black street from end to end, rubbing his neck and sniffing snot back into his nostrils. It had grown quite cold. Freezing spakes of rain began to stipple his scalp. He turned around to face the buildings. Horrified, Jake remembered that his skateboard was still on the sidewalk. He'd have to go back and retrieve it before he could leave, and sure as shit, "I'm getting the fuck out of here," he thought to himself. But the cost of such a feat caused his heart to quicken. He wasn't sure he could make himself do it. Keeping low, he slinked toward a nearby car and stared over its hood at the arcade. Everything seemed lethally still. It was a trap, waiting just for him. He stayed frozen, observing the prospect of returning for nearly 15 minutes before deciding that he just couldn't do it. Sighing deeply, he turned his back on his board and left His lips were trembling, hardly able to take a step without surveying his entire panorama. He traversed the streets back to his house, but avoided the park. It seemed to him that passing through there was a death wish, that it was the perfect place to become prey. He didn't allow himself to blink until he stepped foot on the wilted grass of his lawn. Once inside, he locked every window and bolted every door. He didn't grasp the entire gravity of his situation then and there, but that would be the last time he left the boundaries of his home. The following weeks were a nightmare. The horror wasn't caused by being constantly under siege, but because nothing happened, though the threat remained palpable. He could feel aerated poison sinking into his lungs. The furthest he would travel from his refuge was the curb at the street and the boundaries of his yard. His parents never came home. Even though he rarely saw his neighbors to begin with, they were most definitely out of the picture after the chirping had started. He wanted desperately to know what was happening to him, but the simple fact was, if he left in search of answers, he would surely die. Sometimes, just as he was falling asleep, one of his favorite CDs playing silently through the stereo by his bed, he would hear a rising chorus of chirps in the distance. The din wasn't loud enough to bring him out of his hypnagogic state, but his skin grew lousy with goosebumps. It sounded like a continuous, muffled shriek, like a beautiful byproduct of mass torture. Then, one day, it came for him. He woke up, and the window was ajar. Cold wind was funneled into his room and rushing across his body. It was 6 in the morning, during that strange interim between night and day where the entire world is a flat wash of gray, and if a person hasn't slept, horribly alien thoughts come to mind. Chirp. Jacob heard it unmistakably just outside of his room under the windowsill. Something was there, and all that kept them apart was half a foot of sheetrock, wood, and vinyl siding. He couldn't breathe. The follicles of his scalp were tightening. It seemed like the external world was being sucked away through the hole in his wall. Getting up slowly, he slid his legs across the sheets and placed them carefully on the floor. He rose and, every 3 seconds, stepped closer to the nose. There was no retreating into the hallway or the bathroom. He knew that to turn his back on the thing outside was to perish without knowing. The gust of wind that spewed in at him as he drew closer caused his nipples to harden and shrink. He held himself tightly in his bare arms, his teeth chattering, and squinted against the cold. It took him 5 minutes to reach the window. The suspense was pulling his skin taut over his bones as if it were a Civil War drum hide. He stuck his head out, and there was nothing there. Ducking back inside, he whirled around to make sure nothing was standing at his back and slammed the window closed. With the whisper of the lock sliding back on its groove into the class, the portal was closed. He had a coughing fit. He was in a tomb. Jacob stormed into the living room, lashing the walls of the hallway with the belt of his robe as he went. The chirp was becoming more frequent. He couldn't escape it, and the fact was beginning to eat away at him. He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. It was nearly empty. He had expended the last of the sandwich supplies 2 days before. Staring at the barren, chilled shelves, he wished that his parents had gone to the grocery store before blinking out of existence. He would have liked a couple of tasty snacks before facing his doom. He settled for a meal of 6 frozen Nuggy Kids chicken nuggets, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before his end came to him. Whatever was outside had started to follow him around the house. no matter where he went. It would chirp sometimes in the midst of absolute silence, just to make him jump. He hadn't taken a shower in a week for fear that the stalker might take such an opportunity to waltz inside and get a peek at him before sinking its teeth into his supple flesh and making a meal of him. The dining room table was gleaming from the overhead chandelier as Jacob sat at its head and stared at a dated newspaper from the morning of the 16th. There was a tap on the window. Just behind him, he turned dubiously in the chair, rolling his eyes and shifting his body so that he could see what had laid the nose. As soon as the wooden frame entered his peripheral vision, however, there was an implosion of glass shards. The thing was upon him. It had Jacob pinned onto the table. He stared into its crystalline black eyes. They were lidless orbs set deep into a doughy white head, if a head it could even be considered, more like a malformed sculpture from a kindergarten art class, a scripture direct from hell. It had 7 appendages. 6 of them seemed to be its legs, the 7th extruded from its back through a crop of fungal air sacs. They inflated and deflated intermittently in no obvious rhythm. It was tipped with a terrifically sharp barb that seemed to be leaking a dark purple liquid down its shaft. The creature had a ragged motte just below its eyes. It imposed its putrid breath all over his face. He tried to speak to it, but before his words could amount to much more than a weak rattle in his throat, a shrill chirp blasted out of it and slammed his skull down onto the wood. Its legs began to rattle in their joints. The barb jutting out of its back was curling around its neck and arching. The creature was deciding whether or not to impale him with it. Jacob tilted his head to look around for something to beat it off of him. Just inches from his head was a fallen jag of crystal from the chandelier that had hung above the table minutes before. The thing was leaning in close for some sort of death kiss when Jacob snatched the glimmering fragment and sank it deep into the nape of its neck. It belched a screech that made Jacob's head feel smaller, as if it had begun to fold in on itself like possessed origami. He was close to passing out, but the survivalist in him realized the momentary reprieve for what it was, a chance to wriggle free and fortify himself in his bedroom. He had a solid pine Louisville slugger propped in the corner just to the left of his door. He was imagining just how good it would be for pulverizing the gooey bastard's skull. He slid out from beneath the trilling horror and rolled off the side of the table. Even as he slammed against the dining room hardwood, he could sense a tension at his rear. The thing was regaining its poise and reacquainting itself with its target. Jacob pawed at the floor while pushing himself forward with a few clumsy lunges. He was deafened with the buzzing din of insect wings. The creature was already at his heels. Within a few horribly distorted seconds, the million threads of each second forming a weave which pulsated and churned back and forth. Jacob crossed the threshold of his bedroom. He swiveled on his heels and rammed the door into its jamb with his shoulder. Shortly after, he could hear a solid, violent impact on the other side. The thing had flown headlong into a sudden dead end and was likely dazed. Taking a chance on it, Jacob grabbed the baseball bat and whipped the door open. The creature's legs had given out and splayed at his sides. The shrill tones it had been emitting were replaced by a confused whirring coming from deep inside of its body. It was a writhing black mass of twitches, its white Play-Doh head bobbing merrily. Jacob took no time to study its ghastly form. However, he simply brought the bat down onto it, Repeatedly, 50 swings later, there wasn't much of the thing left for him to observe. He released the bat and knelt, panting. Immediately, the smell of the thing's fluids assaulted his nostrils and made him fall dumbly back into his room on his ass. He scrambled up onto his feet in rage and skirted the abomination to make his way to the kitchen. Digging around under the sink, he found a box of scouring powder. He rejoined the deceased creature and dumped a crystalline white mountain on top of it, then edged his way back into his room and collapsed onto his bed, letting out a shuddering, horrified sigh. Exhausted, drained, Jacob prayed in garbled whispers, anointing the ceiling with wasted breath. The air draped the scent of extraterrestrial decay over every surface. Sleep found him. It was hours later when he awoke. The world beyond his window had become orange with the cant of the sun. He noticed with disquieted clarity that he could no longer hear the blue jays singing as he had only a week before. When he sat up, he heard a sickly squelch and, looking down, observed lengthening tendrils of clear slime oozing off of his back. Panicked, he leapt up and ran into his bathroom. At the mirror, he beheld the worst image of his short, miserable life. There were colonies of pustules expanding and collapsing rhythmically on his cheeks and forehead. He opened his mouth to scream, but the moment his lips parted, a green, chunky mess delivered itself from the captor cavity into the porcelain. With a dawning delirium, Jacob recognized the fetid gruel as his tongue, disintegrated and sedimentary in his head. It had rotted while he slept. Instead of screaming himself hoarse, he had a sneezing fit, but with each violent achoo, a bold crimson jet misted the porcelain bowl. The blood that hadn't evacuated itself was running down his throat, and when vomited it out, most of his teeth wrenched free in the downpour. They were floating in the piss-smelling water of the toilet among chunks of the chicken nuggets that he had nuked and eaten that very morning. Oh, God, he screamed. Why? What made me sick? 5 hours later, Jacob was cringing like a shrimp on the floor of his parents' bedroom. His skin was a gruesome shade of green. Glinting with ichor as some inner slime pushed its way through his pores, he was rotting, alive. He had staggered around the house during those hours, searching for medicine. There was nothing that he thought might help him, but even so, he swallowed 6 different kinds of vitamins and every cold and flu capsule he could find. After the doom settled in, he contented himself with moaning and beating his fists on the walls. The skin on the sides of his hands had been flayed, revealing the hamburger meat gristle beneath. Entering one room, his eyes flickered over the furniture with gut-wrenching familiarity. He'd run a circuit of the place at least 20 times before stumbling into his parents' room and collapsing. The muscle fibers in his legs began to liquefy. There were jagged puddles of dark green and orange fluids crowded around his laboring form, soaked into the carpet. His body spewed them out of various newly formed holes in his chest and back. His mental faculties were beginning to slip away. On the door to the hallway open, a dark humanoid meat stepped in. Dark, actually, wasn't quite precise. It was beyond darkness. It was like a howling body-shaped hole in midair that was sucking light into it. A walking singularity. It chattered to itself, taking infinitesimal steps toward Jacob as he stared up at it. A vague thought rose to the top of his brain like a bubble in a glass of water. That was the thing hiding behind the sycamore in the Jamesons' yard the day this all started. Ever so slightly his eyes began to widen. He tried to wrench his body across the carpet, to create distance between himself and the whistling anomaly from beyond. But the moment he squirmed, he could feel his spinal cord separate from itself like a saturated strand of toilet paper. He screamed and literally coughed up part of his lung. The dark being approached him and crouched, tilting its head in an almost loving way, as if it cared. Then Jacob saw one of the last and most horrifying sights of his life. Multiple tentacles leered out of its back and began to form balloon-like spheres at their tips. The spheres then began morphing into recognizable faces. All of his friends, his parents. They gaped down at him and moved their mouths open and closed, but produced no words. Tears were spilling down his cheeks as he looked on. The thing bent over him, planted its hands on Jacob's head and pulled him closer. He could feel the skin on his face loosening itself from his skull and fluttering away in sail-like flaps. His scalp was splitting and the bone beneath was crisscrossed with jaunty, scribbling cracks as it ruptured from the force. He was all but gone. A goofy smile crossed his face. He began to slobber, but tears still welled in his lower eyelids. What a strange way to die, he thought, giving the thing a humorous wink. When he reopened his eye, it burst, and its insides sluiced out of the socket onto his collarbone. The being embraced Jacob and sucked his skeleton clean with its vacuum skin. Moments later, his face sprouted out of its back on another one of its black, writhing stalks. It had a wan but jubilant expression as it bobbed. The Jacob simulation's eyes gazed out of a window on the west wall and watched as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky with a shimmer of bloody dusk shine. A few chirps sounded out, then many more, rising into a shrill opera in the distance. Story 7. The Dark Spot. "Hello, my old friend," Griffin said aloud as he stared out the window at the dark spot. It had been at least 2 decades since he had seen the Shadow Man. A moment later, Julie came into the bedroom and stood next to Griffin at the large bay window. "Holy crap," she exclaimed. "Is that him? Is that the Shadow Man?" Griffin simply nodded next to her. "Baby, I'm just utterly amazed. I can't believe you grew up with that creepy-ass thing outside your window. We gotta put this on Facebook." She left the room for a moment and Griffin sighed. Was he really about to live in this room again? Julie returned a moment later, cell phone in hand, camera at the ready. "Open the window for me, babe. I want to get a good shot of that thing." Griffin complied with his wife's request, rotating the small metal handle at the base of the window. Julie leaned out as far as she could without making it dangerous and proceeded to take several pictures of the dark spot, both with and without the flash. A few minutes later, she was sitting on Griffin's childhood bed and scrolling through the shots, cursing excessively as she did. There was no doubt that Griffin loved her to pieces, but she did have the mouth of a sailor from time to time. "You can't see him in any of these shots. This is horrible. How much did we pay for these damn phones again?" Griffin put his hand on her shoulder and tried to console her. "Sorry, sweetheart. It just doesn't show up in pictures. Believe me, I've tried." "HMMPH," she responded. "Screw that. We're digging the expensive camera out of its box tomorrow, and I'm getting a picture of that thing. I think it's in one of the ones in the study where we put all the electronics. Practically, Their entire existence was packed away in a box somewhere in that old house. They were in the process of moving into Griffin's childhood home. He had spent the first 17 years of his life in the very room they would be sleeping in that night. It was a beautiful Victorian-era home, the kind that just weren't made anymore. It had for bedrooms what his parents had converted one into an office and one into a sewing room for his mother, so there were really only two choices of where to sleep, and it just didn't feel right sleeping in his parents' old bedroom. Probably never would. His father, who made a substantial living as a heart surgeon, could do nothing for his own health, however, and died a year before from lung cancer. His mother passed on 6 months after that, most likely from a broken heart. Griffin gave some consideration to selling the property, but Julie was having none of it. "You would hate yourself if you let anyone else move in here," she had said, and she was right. Discovering that Julie was pregnant 2 months ago was the main reason I opted out of their loft in the city for the slower life of rural living. The yard, if you could call it that, was nearly 4 acres in all, but the highlight of the entire property was the enormous oak tree that sat directly behind the house. The house had been there for nearly a century, and the tree much, much longer than that. One couldn't tell exactly how old it was without cutting it down and counting the rings, but Griffin imagined 500 or 600 years wasn't out of the realm of possibility. That's where the Shadow Man lived. There was a bare patch facing Griffin's bedroom window, a bare patch which, at night, became the dark spot. When one looked out that window, at that angle the shadows of the dark spot came together to create a perfect humanoid silhouette crouching on a branch. It only happened after dark, but there was something about the combination of the back porch lights and the light from the work shed that filtered through the leaves, creating the perfectly disturbing image. There were even 2 dots of light where eyes should be, and a small line that could easily represent an uneven smile. Griffin was around 6, and he first noticed a spooky image, and, although he knew full well was just a trick of the light and shadow even at that age, his young, fertile imagination took a hold of it and ran. The non-existent details of the Shadow Man were filled in at night by young Griffin's dreams, with thick, leathery skin that looked like oil poured into a human mold. It had no nose or ears, only eyes, and large lip-splitting grin defined by sharply pointed, pearlescent teeth. It would slink into his window at night to terrorize in a variety of ways, from crouching on a young Griffin's chest and watching him struggle to breath as he slept, to crawling up the walls and ceiling where it would hiss at the terrified child through its barbed teeth. These were, of course, only nightmares, but the effect they had on his psyche growing up was significant. To say his formative years were troubling would have been an understatement. Once he reached high school, however, Griffin had matured enough to realize the paranoia was of his own doing, and the majority of his dreams became about girls. But the Shadow Man never left him completely, popping by once every couple of weeks just to say hi. He remembered standing in that same spot his last night in the house before he left for Johns Hopkins Medical School. He remembered looking at the Shadow Man for what he thought was going to be the last time and thinking, "I will never see you again, and I will not miss you." He was half right, at least. "I guess I was wrong about that one," he muttered to himself. "Wasset." Julie mumbled back, still scouring over her pictures of the dark spot. She just couldn't figure out why she only see branches and leaves and a bare spot, especially in the pictures where she used the flash. Instead of the menacing silhouette she could clearly see with her eyes, straining, she tried to figure out what parts of the tree contributed to the illusion. "Nothing, just talking to myself," he answered. Julie threw her phone down on the bed in frustration. "Well, one thing's for sure," she sighed. "There's no way I'm going to be able to sleep in here with that damn thing outside the window. I mean, geez, I don't know how you did it as a kid. Things effing scary." Griffin smiled. "You get used to him." Julie shook her head emphatically. "Oh, hell no, and don't call it a him. Tomorrow you put up a floodlight or something. Got it?" Griffin continued to smile. "And tonight you hold me real close. You got it, Griff." Griffin sat on the bed next to his pregnant wife and held her tightly. "I won't let him get you tonight," he whispered in her ear while in the embrace, the teasing resulting in a smack on the arm. The next morning, Griffin rose before Julie, which wasn't uncommon. Most days, he was at the hospital before she awoke to the automatic coffee maker's aroma. Since he was on leave for the move, he could have slept in with her if he had wanted. And maybe he did. But internal clocks can be difficult to reset, especially as he was a creature of habit. They had a lot on the agenda for the day anyway, the biggest of which was to move the lion's share of his parents' possessions to the sizable attic and basement. There were some things that could be sold and some things that could be given away, but much like the house itself, most would be too hard to part with. That didn't mean the stuff needed to stay where it was, however. Griffin was adamant when they decided to make the move that the house be the home of Griffin and Julie Masters, and not that of Ben and Mary Masters. It wouldn't have been fair to either of them to try and make a life in a home surrounded by the possessions and memories of someone else's life, even if it were his parents. Julie, who was a bit of an aspiring decorator, was so excited for the opportunity to redecorate the immense estate anyway. Who was he to take that away from her? He loved his wife so much, even as she slept with no makeup and a bird's nest on her head. She was the loveliest thing Griffin had ever seen. Turning from her, he looked out the window at the oak tree and the bare spot. How many times had he looked at that spot during the day, just trying to piece together what it was he was seeing at night? What knob, which branch, what series of leaves contributed to the eerie figment that appeared at night? A greater percentage of his childhood was spent studying that bare spot than he cared to admit, even to himself. And here he was, 20 years later, doing the same damn thing after his coffee, but before Julie woke. Griffin left for the local hardware store to get a floodlight for the back of the house and had it mounted by lunch. When the sun finally went down, they discovered just how well it worked as it lit up the entire backyard like Wrigley Field. There was absolutely no pisk of the Shadow Man's return with it on. However, there was a very high possibility that neither of them would be able to sleep again. It was so bright that it filled the bedroom and half the hallway. "I guess I won't need a lamp to read in bed anymore," Julie had joked, but still ended up sending him out to shut it off. "I guess the Shadow Man wins again." She continued to kid as he came back to bed, but he found he wasn't able to laugh with her. It was such a stupid thing to even be concerned with. But he was. He was a renowned doctor. For Pete's sake, there were so many crucial things that he needed to worry about. But now that the Shadow Man was back in his thoughts, he refused to leave. The only saving grace to that was that he had yet to appear in Griffin's dreams again. Several days passed before the Shadow Man came up in conversation again, mostly because they had so much to keep busy in the unpacking process, but also due in part to Julie having stacked the bay window full of boxes and obscuring the view out. When they were finally removed and she saw the dark spot again, Julie jumped into action with the recently found Pentax 6 for 5D digital camera, which ran around $10,000. And Griffin had gotten it for his wife the Christmas before last. Similar to her current decorating aspirations, amateur photography was her passion at that time. If Griffin were being honest, there was really very little his wife couldn't do. It was just hard to keep her focused on any one thing for an extended period of time. She had an innate ability to master her passions very quickly and then become bored with them, as was common with people who shared her very high IQ. That was, of course, one of the many things he loved about her. She managed to snap a handful of pictures before the front doorbell rang out, drawing her attention away from the task. It was the closest neighbors of 30 years who came to welcome Griffin back to the area with crumb cake, as well as to meet the wife of the lanky teen they remembered being so introverted. It turned into a lovely evening, with the McMillions sharing a few embarrassing stories from Griffin's youth, but mostly just reminiscing his parents. They had become very close to Ben and Mary over the years, and their death hit them probably the hardest. They are just so sweet, Julie had said later that night in bed. I wanted to scoop them up and put them in my pocket. Griffin nodded in agreement. Did you see the way he kept holding her head? She cozied up and put her head on his chest. Are you going to hold my hand like that when we're their age? He took her hand and turned it over in his own, so much that people will think we're glued together. It was, as usual, the perfect answer. It had been a wonderful day, and the topic of the Shadow Man hadn't come up at all. Griffin hadn't given him a single moment's thought, until Julie's last words before drifting away to unconsciousness. Decorative lights. It was so soft he barely heard her. Huh? He prompted. Lights, yea. She was slipping fast, eyes already closed. Lights for the tree. Damn shadow dude. And then she was out. Damn it, Griffin muttered. He had almost made it to a state of sleep without the Shadow Man invading his mind, and now, albeit unintentionally, Julie had placed him front and center just as he would be entering the dream theater. He tried desperately to push his thoughts elsewhere, his patience the move, even the sweetness of the McMillions, but to no avail. The Shadow Man just kept pushing his way in. Falling into a deep REM state, Griffin found himself face to face with the demon. Although his was the face of a 10-year-old, Griffin had not his current stature. They were seated across from one another on the floor, the creature crouching, he sat Indian style. This was a new scenario. The Shadow Man was making no aggressive moves, only smiling its unsettling smile, and in a moment of odd lucidity, Griffin seemed to realize that he was in a dream. The revelation emboldened him to reach his hand out toward the Shadow Man. Perhaps making contact would be the key to overcoming the psychological power this thing had held over him for so long. The Shadow Man reached one gnarled hand out as well, and their fingers were only inches apart. Griffin felt unafraid. For the first time ever, he felt like he had some degree of control over the situation. It was his mind after all. Shouldn't he be the one directing the action? What do you want from me? dream?" Griffin asked, completely calm. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" For the first time that he could remember, the Shadow Man made a noise other than its hiss. It was a disturbing, physically nauseating screech somewhere between nails on a chalkboard and a dental drill. It started small and began to grow louder and louder to the point where Griffin had to cover his ears with his hands. But even then it penetrated right into his brain. He began to scream as well, and just as the shriek reached a crescendo, and Griffin thought he could take no more, the Shadow Man leapt from his spot onto the floor, onto the young boy's chest, knocking him backwards. Adult Griffin shot upright in bed, knocking Julie from his chest in the process. She mumbled something incoherently and rolled to her side. Griffin was soaked with sweat. The dream seemed like a minute or two at most, but the alarm clock glowing bedside said differently. It was 5 in the morning, and although still dark outside, he was more than ready to start the day. He rose, gave the dark spot a disdainful glance, and headed towards the shower. Lowe's would be open in few hours, and he was ready to do some shopping for decorative tree lights. Being the first person in the store was convenient, if not a little surreal, but he had no idea what he was looking or really. This was Julie's area of expertise, and he had really only received a half-conscious suggestion to work with. Christmas tree lights were probably not what she had in mind, but then again, who knows, he ended up settling on everything. The final bill was just under $2,000 as he purchased every possibility for lighting his tree, and some things that weren't intended for that purpose, but which may have been made to work. Julie could make the final decision. He could tell from her expression that his walking in the door with 6 large Lowe's bags as Julie sat at the kitchen table with her coffee was a bit of an overwhelming start to her day. "Okay," she said, feigning sarcastic indifference. "This makes perfect sense. You said you wanted tree lights." He dumped the bags on the kitchen table before her. "So, here you go. So, how many trees were we planning to light up?" He laughed. "You pick, and what we don't use, I'll take back." Julie started sorting through the various packages and shook her head. "Geez, being away from work is absolutely killing you, isn't it?" Griffin chuckled in agreement. It was better that she thought that, rather than the fact that he might be slipping back into a childhood psychosis. His profession brought him close to all number of neuroses, and he knew well the power of the mind. Unfortunately, these were things he hadn't been trained to treat, things that usually got referred to a different branch of medicine entirely. Not that he was ready to go that route for himself just yet. It was only a nightmare, after all, and he wasn't a child anymore. Julie ended up deciding on a $30 set of cordless electric candles that could be placed strategically around the tree and then lit via remote control. "You can probably get these up in a couple hours," she said, "don't you think?" Griffin skeptically admitted that it might take a bit longer, and by the time the sun went down a little after 7, he had proven it to be the case. Highly motivated and armed with hammer, nails, and a 40-foot ladder, Griffin was more than a little disappointed at only getting 3 into the tree before the lack of light made the endeavor too dangerous to continue. Leaving the ladder leaning on to the oak, Griffin called it quits for the night and decided to take a short walk around the property. There was a well-worn path towards the edge of the yard that a young Griffin had walked at least 1,000 times. but not for a few decades. It brought back memories of summer nights and catching fireflies, and it was where he was in a deep state of reminiscence, and Julie's distant cry broke through his entrancement. "Griffin." The panic in her voice was evident even at his distance, and Griffin broke into a sprint. "Griff, where are you?" "Griffin, hurry." Adrenaline-fueled, he made it the back door in just under a minute. "Julie," he screamed. "In here," she called back from the living room, and he hurried to her. Finding her on the couch hunched over her laptop, Griffin wasn't sure what he expected to find, but, fortunately, this was not it. Her voice had scared him so badly, his initial reaction, he was ashamed to admit to himself, was one of anger. That was the type of scream that should only be reserved for mortality-impacting situations. "What the hell?" "Jules." He tried not to let the irritation come through. "You scared the shit out of me." She looked up from the screen to his face, and the anxiety came flooding back. Griffin could not remember ever seeing that look on his wife's face. Drained of color and full of creased lines he had never seen before, the fear-induced expression made his neck hair stand on end. All she could utter was, "Look," as she pointed to the computer screen. Griffin joined her on the couch and, for a moment, wasn't sure what he was seeing. Was this some kind of horror website or something? And then it hit him. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and all the air left his lungs. It was a picture of the Shadow Man in the dark spot. The uber-expensive digital camera not only captured the image previously only available to the naked eye, but it had enhanced the appearance significantly. It was there, in the dark spot, in perfect clarity, with details only seen before in Griffin's night terrors. Crouching on the branch, as it always seemed to be, its legs could be seen easily, its arms, chest, elbows, shoulders, neck, and torso all plainly evident. This was no trick of the eyes or shadowy illusion. This was clearly the image of a real creature, sitting in the tree outside their bedroom window. They sat there in silence for several long minutes, staring at the image, struggling to wrap their minds around it. While working it through, Griffin came to a realization that made something in his mind snap and brought him into action. If this damn thing was real, then so was all the shit it had put him through growing up. Anger overcame the paralytic fear, and he ran to his father's gun cabinet in the upstairs office, grateful they hadn't hauled it to the attic yet. After grabbing his father's Benelli double-barrel shotgun and a tactical flashlight, Griffin started to head back downstairs, taking a quick look from the hallway and through his bedroom window at the Shadow Man, crouching where he always was. As he headed outside, Griffin was aware that his behavior was that of a paranoid, delusional psychotic. But if that was the case, then Julie was too. She was in the kitchen and made no effort to stop him when she saw the shotgun wearing etched on her face. She reached one hand out towards him, her eyes telling him to be careful, while her mouth remained unable to move. Outside, he got in the only space, right up next to the house, which provided any type of ground view of the dark spot. It was an uncomfortable angle, and he had to strain his neck to see anything at all. But there was something. It was too hard to tell. It could be a trick of the eyes, but Griffin could swear he could make out the edges of Denise poking out and possibly the top of its head. He had never tried to look for the thing from this angle before, and even if he had, he wouldn't have been able to see anything from a child's height. Griffin snapped the tack light into a plastic fixture attached to the top of the gun and leveled the instrument on the dark spot. He turned the light on, flooding the tree with illumination, and any semblance of the creature he might have thought he saw before was gone. Just an empty branch and a bare spot. Turning the light off brought back the small bit of it again. He screamed at the tree, his voice unbridled hatred. "Get the hell out of my tree, you bastard, or I will blow you out." Griffin wasn't sure what to expect from that other than a small sense of catharsis. But what he didn't expect was that it would move. Despite Julie's pictures, there was something in the back of his mind that refused to believe that the Shadow Man was real. It was just so outside of his realm of reality that he still expected it to be unusual optics combined with extreme paranoia. When the Shadow Man's head leaned forward and made eye contact with Griffin's, all of that was out the window. Griffin flipped the light back on. Nothing. He was still a little remiss to fire. The last thing he wanted was to blow a sleeping squirrel or bird's nest out of the tree. They caved to Pitta for goodness' sake. The light was extinguished again. It was fully leaning over now, almost fully exposed, its sharp little teeth grinning at him. As soon as it began hissing the horrible dream hiss, Griffin fired the first shot. The painful, high-pitched squeal from the night before echoed out into the night air unexpectedly, and the shock of it combined with the weapon's recoil set Griffin falling backwards to his pants. There was a deep thud of something large falling to the ground several feet in front of him. Griffin fumbled with the gun for a moment and then switched the light back on, scanning the area. He got quickly to his feet and flipped the light back off. It was there writhing on the ground, and when it knew it was being seen again, it began its hissing. Griffin leveled the gun again and was about to fire the second shell when he heard Julie calling out from behind him and turned for a split second. "Griff," she was scared. "Are you okay?" When he turned his attention back to the Shadow Man, it was gone, and no combination of turning the light on and off brought it back into view. There were, however, thick black drops on the ground around the old oak. Blood. Maybe he had killed it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Griffin did feel a sense of relief concerning the apparition. Not that it mattered in the long run. That, and for every night after, the dark spot only looked like a dark spot. It really wasn't even that dark as one could see a small patch of the night sky shining through the center of it. That was irrelevant for Griffin and Julie, however, and the house was sold a month after. They would be raising their new child in the city after all.